Hello, everybody. Welcome back. So this is the last doubleheader of the semester. Okay, so we're going to do lessons 5 and lessons 6 together here this week. Normally, I've got two separate lesson videos. I'm going to put them together. It makes a lot of sense. We're going to have one long video. Sorry about that, but I thought it'd be best given the situation. What we're looking at now is an environmental analysis. When I taught in Europe, they called the PESTLE analysis, PESTLE. Okay. And it relates to the different environments that exist in marketing that we need to understand. Basically, what the hell are we getting ourselves into? So why don't we dive into some of these, the political environment. So the political environment of a company basically is just as it sounds, the political systems. I look at it this way. We'll talk about law in a second. The political environment of today usually reflects the legal environment tomorrow. So when a new regime comes in, and a new administration in the United States comes in, a lot of industries are going to take a look and say, okay, what's their voting history? What's their position on different things that impact our industry? Are they pro-business? Are they high tax, low tax, things of that nature? So it gives us insight into what it's going to be like to do business with these individuals, okay? It also could, again, be a pathway to examining what the laws of the future might be, assuming they want to make substantial changes to the regulatory and legal environment. And again, we'll talk about the law in a second. The key to understanding political risk, it can relate to a lot of things. A big part of this can be things like stability. There could be other things as well, but let's talk about stability. Is there a threat of a coup? Is there a threat to, the physical well-being of our people, our property, etc.? Is there the threat of confiscation or expropriation of goods, whether or not we get compensated for it? Makes the distinction there. Is a new regime going to come in and say, hey, thanks for the oil derricks, guys, get the hell out of here, you're in trouble? Is there a chance of a civil war developing, happening on our lap right now that creates real problems as a company that's doing business abroad? That's something we need to consider. Economic risk works largely the same way, although I want to emphasize something here. So when we talk about things like stability and coups and political instability and less than peaceful transitions of power, these are obviously things that we typically see maybe in the developing world. But I want to emphasize there's political risk everywhere, even in the more developed world. Going back to Brexit, think about the economic and political risks there. Your ability to do business with customers you might have had for decades on the continent, that was seriously risked. What kind of negotiations were there going to be? What kind of deal was the United Kingdom going to be able to negotiate to be a third party to the EU? Political risk. What happens to the pound? Economic risk. As a matter of fact, the day after the announcement of the vote, my real salary against the US dollar dropped overnight 20%. True story. One of the reasons why I'm here in Pittsburgh and not still there. It recovered a little bit, but never fully. These are the things you need to understand. The other thing I want you to understand about economic risk is the idea that there is a macro and a micro analysis of economics. The big picture versus the smaller picture. Now, the smaller picture could be a region, a small area, a town, a zip code, could be anything. Could be an industry. The idea that the macro picture and the micro picture always line up is just not true. Let me give you an example. There are times where the global economy is red hot, maybe the U.S. economy is red hot, but there's certain areas where the economy is doing very, very poorly. There were towns in New Mexico that kind of disappeared overnight. And I mean modern day, not the ancient ghost towns of back in the day, but let's say a copper mine dries up. So the price of copper goes down. Globally, the economy is doing very well for other reasons. Why? Because most people aren't mining copper. But let's say this little town in New Mexico really exists due to the copper mine. So the copper mine dries up, they lay off people. Those individuals can no longer afford to go shopping. They need a job, they probably leave. What happens to the tax base, the school district, the local government, the local gas station, the local grocery stores? It has a knock-on effect. So So the macro situation is A-okay, and the micro situation is really not that good. Let me give you another example industry-wide. There are times where I've been teaching full-time in business schools about 20 years now, a little over 20 years. And I would argue that typically, in my experience, the enrollment in graduate programs, especially MBAs, tend to work inversely with the economy. So when the economy's hot and people are getting job offers and they're getting good job offers, the kinds of jobs they want, they're not being underemployed nor underpaid, they tend to stick there. Whereas some people say, listen, I've got some job experience. The job market is trash right now. I don't want to just take any job. Let me go back to get my MBA and hopefully ride it out. So the 18 months, 24 months, whatever it is that I complete that program, hopefully the economy picks up and I've got a graduate degree to boot. So the enrollment tends to work inversely with the economy. Other places that are heavily government funded will be the inverse, right? So there are times like San Antonio, Texas, a lot of government money there, especially military. So the economy, hot or cold, isn't necessarily as relevant. Yes, there's non-military presence there, but a lot of the city seems to be propped up by federal money. So if the economy's bad, I'm not saying they don't feel it. I'm saying they may not feel it as much as other cities that are based more upon, the direct GDP, non-related to government funding, as opposed to places that are really propped up by the military. And the inverse could be true as well, right? Where the economy's really hot and the military spending can go down, political risk. There are times where a new administration comes in, and I know for a fact people in San Antonio were a little nervous saying, well, wait a minute, what's going to happen to military spending? Are they going to cut our budget? Are they going to create issues for us? So that's one way in which I say political risk and economic risk can be intertwined to some extent. Just remember to examine the macro and micro factors. They can be significantly distinct in terms of regional location, industry, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? We've established the cultural environment we already talked about in lesson 3 and lesson 4 from a business standpoint. The environmental, like physical environment, is one as well that we need to consider if there are environmental factors, especially when we start going to other countries where there might be a more significant pursuit of net zero when it comes to impact of climate change, when it comes to how recyclable products are, how they're treated and so forth, the impact to the environment you can have, EPA protections. Under this administration in Pittsburgh, I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's really just not nearly as robust as you find in other countries. Now, I know Pittsburgh has improved in terms of the climate and pollution and so forth compared to the old steel mill days, but there are days where it can be a little tough to breathe here. And I know for a fact that some of the coke works and so forth, they will exceed EPA regulations and get a little slap on the wrist and proceed as normal, okay, which is not the case globally. You need to understand those environmental regulations. I think that's a great segue to international law. Here's the deal. My dad was an attorney. He was a big fan of international law and politics. Spoke some and wrote some Chinese, some Mandarin. Very interesting guy. And he always told me, he said, listen, international law is dictated by the barrel of the gun. People who think international law is at all reflective of domestic law need to rethink their position. Domestic law is not perfect, but here in the United States and other countries with similar systems, we do have some degree of confidence that there is an established procedure that we can expect, a reasonable time frame in which the proceedings will be concluded, and we hopefully will have the ability to get justice. Again, I'm not naive. Your mileage will definitely vary, and it's usually correlated to how many resources you have in terms of dollars. But we do have some expectations and some degree of comfort that if somebody violates my IP, I at least have a shot at fighting it in court. If they're a big company, maybe not equal footing, definitely not equal footing, but something. Internationally, you don't have that at all. There's no such thing as the international constitution. International law is voluntary. It's adhered to by treaty. You have to agree to it. Okay? That's not to say that powerful countries can't throw around their weight a little bit and manipulate individuals or force individuals into playing nice. But the idea that there's international laws and a court that's going to get you in a timely manner and there's a standard that you can expect, it doesn't exist. I'm not picking on the country, but last time I checked in India, if you were a foreign company trying to sue one of their domestic companies for, let's say, a contract dispute, the wait to be seen in court was about a decade. That's a bit older information that might have changed for the better or not. Might have changed the other way. That's just to be seen in court. Now, these proceedings can take a lot of time, can be very expensive, and then even if you win, the collection, the adjudication of, whatever the decision is, that could take time as well. So if you're a company that's relying on this contract, let's say you put all your eggs in that basket and you don't get paid, you might have a real problem. You might have a real problem. So that's something to consider. So in international law, what are the laws? What are the rules that are being dictated? What country and whose country's laws are precedent there? So which one has jurisdiction? Where do we sue if there's a dispute? I think intelligent companies actually dictate this by contract, and usually it's where the contract is written, signed, and or executed, okay? But understand that different countries will have different laws that might be more favorable to yourself or the other party. The other issue is the fact that, again, enforcing international law can be difficult. We talk about things like the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, the World Trade Organization that, mediates disputes between countries. If you look at the teeth that these organizations actually have, you're going to realize that going back to the barrel of the gun, the biggest kid, it's schoolhouse rules. When the teacher's not there, and there's really no teacher, the kids are negotiating among themselves how they're going to act in the playground. Might's going to make right. I'm not picking on the United States, but we don't always have the best reputation when it comes to signing international agreements, agreeing to adhere to international law, and then violating that law. We're not the only ones, by any means. We don't always have the best reputation there. So this is one of the things, one of the areas that makes global marketing so incredibly complex, is that doing this domestically, let's say the United States, people in the UK, when I talk to them, they can't believe how different the laws can be in different states for many different things. Because, obviously you have United law under the UK and, with certain exceptions, but not many, not as many as the United States. And they can't believe that, a driving test, a driver's license, getting this done, getting that done. The laws are so incredibly different, the taxes and how they're collected and so forth. So that's complex enough here in the United States. So if you're a company here in Pittsburgh, let's say, and you're doing business with other states, you have to, adhere to the tax collection laws and those types of things. If you're an athlete, they got the so-called jock tax where you pay taxes in every place where you play, or most of them. So that makes things complex. But when we get into different areas, economic areas, free trade agreement areas, like we talked about the EU or NAFTA, these types of things, when we get into very different legal systems with very different types of consumer, company, and other types of protections, the manner in which they're adjudicated, the manner in which and the time frame in which they're processed, and then how they're enforced can be remarkably different. So while a market on the surface may look incredible from a marketing standpoint, there's very little competition. People are begging for this stuff. We know through the gray market, people are buying our product, which tells me they would probably appreciate it if we formally entered that market and sold our product there. But there might be legal ramifications why that would not be profitable given the current legal environment. Now, there might be rumblings of new administrations coming through that might be a lot more business friendly, especially to foreign business. Now we're getting back into the dynamic between political environments and legal environments, okay? The relationship between those two, the politics of today or the laws of tomorrow. The other issue I want to talk about here is the regulatory environment. Regulatory environment can relate to, there are regulatory bodies in the United States that can make laws. There are also regulatory bodies not affiliated with any government on the planet that can make laws, rules that can significantly impact your business. Let's say that you're a company that supplies engines for Formula One cars. Just throwing something out there. The Formula One organization can make laws, rules about what these engines can be, how much power they can have, what they're made of, any of these types of regulations. So let's say one day you're on the assembly line, you're preparing the engines for the new season, the new race season, and suddenly they pass a law and say these current engines are unsafe. We've decided to implement this new regulation where engines must have this. And whatever this is, it's not relevant for this case. It's not within the engines you're already making. You've got to go back to either the drawing board, depending on how profound the difference is, or you have to get into the production line to make those changes, which can be very expensive, could be catastrophic to your business, depending on the nature and scale of your business. So when we say legal and regulatory, we aren't just talking about government affiliated. We're talking about private organizations, FIFA, making rules about what equipment can and cannot be like, for example, what different types of tournaments have to be, how the United States is going to manage the World Cup and what they can and cannot do this upcoming World Cup this summer, okay? These are regulatory bodies. They aren't governments. They don't have armies behind them. But if you want to do business with these organizations, you will comply with regulations, okay? That's it in a nutshell, the PESTLE analysis. What are we getting ourselves into? How do we analyze these things? I believe the assignments this week are straightforward. Let me know if there are any questions or concerns, and I will see you next time, folks, where we start reverting back to, single lessons in a single week. Imagine that. Thank you very much, folks.